whistle has blown and we're into extra time. I'm joined by Dr. Nicholas Watanabe, professor of sports and entertainment management at South Carolina and author of The Beautiful Game, ? The Story Shaping the Future of Soccer. We're going to talk about the football war, or I guess I should say the 100 Hours War. So, Nick, did you know about the football war before you listened to the podcast? Did you know about it before we began?
Yes, I have, just because I teach courses that are somewhat related to this. I'm not like some of my colleagues who do sport diplomacy. This would fall right exactly in their area, but I teach international sport, a lot of sporting events, and I like to bring a lot of context. So in my research, of course, the football war has come up. And then there's also the wonderful book, Football Against the Enemy, which, if you haven't read it, is a great one. And, it would be impossible to write a book like that without actually talking about the football war. So, yeah, I have some background, but not as deep as everything that's been talked about in the previous episode. I was listening, and it's lots of great information, so.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because you had heard about it before, how much of that was the narrative that is in the beginning half of the podcast, where it's like the one version, the Kapuscinski kind of version of it, versus how much of it is the real kind of what happened, understanding of what was really happening with global politics, as opposed to the kind of like cheap, it was soccer version.
I think a lot, especially from a sports side, that obviously we get is that it's, this was entirely about football. Oh yeah, football's such an important sport. These two countries were really good friends with each other, and all of a sudden, this match happened and they became worst enemies, which, is preposterous. It'd have to take quite a match for that to happen. If you look about how many of enemies really play against each other across the world all the time, that hasn't triggered other conflicts. So clearly, a rational actor would say, oh yes, there had to be something else, which you did a wonderful job detailing. But at a surface level, a lot of people do like to use the cheaper, football is the cause of this. And it also goes very well in hand with this narrative, especially in the, 70s and 80s that emerged out of England, that, football and football fans is a bunch of hooligans who cause problems around the world. And police forces and governments love to cast the blame onto them rather than larger social issues, right? And so this is not an uncommon thing where the ills of society are reflected in football, but then football and its supporters will get the blame because there is some bad history there, but it's not to the level where we're the ones who really started the war.
Yeah, and you brought up how Britain's kind of exporting the idea of like hooliganism, and Lestrange, who was the diplomat that was in Honduras, the British diplomat that was in Honduras, writes back and he says nothing outside of what normally happens outside of a Man City match is, or I guess Man United at the time. This is all par for the course. This is not a big problem. And I think that is kind of a really interesting level to this story. And it brings me into my next question, which was, today, while we're recording, is the start of the 2026 World Cup. But that and the 1970 World Cup, which is what they were qualifying for, feel like two different sports completely. Can you talk a little bit about what's some of the things that have changed, both less so in the sport, but more like in the coverage of it and the politics of it from 1970 to 2026?
So it's not even a World Cup thing. All sport has changed drastically from 1970 to today. The big, probably watershed moment you would get in a lot of your traditional textbooks would be 1984, right? The Los Angeles Olympics, or as I like to call it, the commercial games, where we realized we can take a sporting event and a mega sporting event and really commercialize it, right? That's where we brought in all the big U.S. companies as sponsors to, everything's advertised. And now if you think about the World Cup, we've taken that to a whole different level, right? There's like an official, car sponsor. Well, car sponsor is pretty normal, but there's like, they even segment the official alcoholic beverage of FIFA is Budweiser, right? So it's to the level of, back then they were like, oh, we can get sponsorship? Oh, that's crazy. We're just playing a game. Like, come on. Now it's like, no, we must have every sponsor we can get, segmented, dynamic ticket pricing, all of this. So, one does hearken for those days where you could probably afford to get a ticket if you were interested in going to the World Cup. And where everything wasn't commercialized. So it is a very different time period, right? It is a different sport too. The rules of the game, in fact, have been changed to try to make it so that, so that the game is more commercial, more exciting. For example, the back pass rule. So it used to be you could kick the ball back to the goalkeeper with your feet, and he could pick the ball up with his hands. And then he could pass it back to you, and then he could kick it back to him, he could pick it up. After Denmark in 1990 used this, or 92, what was that? I forget, one of those years, used this to the extent that it was egregious. They essentially eliminated the back pass rule. But they also, even changed at the World Cup. A win used to be 2 points, a tie used to be 1 point. And so all you really had to do to advance was tie 3 times. And you advance, draw 3 times, you move to the next round. And they said, well, this is terrible football. So a win they made worth 3, so that you would have to go out and at least win 1 match. You'd have to try to score goals to make the game more exciting. Weirdly, because we're now at the Mega World Cup of 48 teams, the probabilities actually this year say that about 67% of teams that draw all 3 games should advance the next round. So we've actually gone a little bit backward in terms of the contest design side. But yes, the sport's entirely different than what we were looking at, several decades ago.
Yeah, and the coverage too. So, I have that little clip in the episode about it being the first games or the first World Cup in color, right? And being the first World Cup not in Europe or South America.
Yes.
And one of the things that afforded teams like Honduras and El Salvador and of course the countries behind them was kind of like an anonymity. Like, because you're not getting these, because you're not constantly, like, for instance, running up to this World Cup, all the friendlies on TV, everything's broadcast.
Yes.
I had so much trouble trying to find any kind of recording of the first match or the second match. Why? Because most people in El Salvador and Honduras did not have televisions. And so they were not widely televised. The reason that I had the third match and all of the wonderful calls from that is because that was played in Mexico, where they were hosting the World Cup. And so they actually recorded that one, live, as it were, and aired it to television. So I think that's a big part of it too, is that in 1970, like, there was this you could have, not only could you afford to be, but you could also actually just be kind of like an anonymous team that shows up at the tournament that nobody really knew about and nobody was following. And so that kind of leads into the reason that Honduras and El Salvador tried to kind of publicize these matches by propagandizing them.
Yes.
So a big aspect of the misinformation that El Salvador was able to push was based in the fact that, like, Americans don't have the same soccer culture as, say, certainly South America or Europe. Like, why does soccer culture, and they kind of weaponized that difference to try to be like, oh, soccer culture is a little scary. We can start a war over this, football match. Why do you think soccer culture like that scares America so much?
I mean, if you think about it, there's many levels. One, you could juxtapose it to, what the idea of baseball was in the 70s. Even though we do have disco demolition, where we literally have riots at sporting events, and yet somehow it still has that idea of, the natural or, field of dreams, that it's this American traditional sport where people who truly love this game go out there and play this sport that's supposed to reflect American ideals. And, at the end of the game, you're supposed to shake hands or even get a beer with one another, and everything's nice and friendly. And that also goes to the way we do stadiums in the U.S. In the U.S., you buy a ticket. Doesn't matter which team you cheer for. You sit wherever you bought your ticket, right? Whereas if you go to any soccer culture around the world, the idea of putting an away fan in the middle of the home fans is the absolute craziest idea ever, right? I continuously have to warn even my own students. I take them for study abroad to the UK. We buy home tickets to teams that they clearly are cheering for the other team for. And I'd be like, you can't wear your shirt. You can't wear those colors, right? Like, think about that. You wear the wrong color t-shirt into, let's say Manchester City. You're going to watch a Manchester City match and you wear a red t-shirt into the middle of the home section. Everybody's immediately head's just going to snap around and be like, who is this guy? What's he doing? You've marked yourself, right? So I think there's these really big differences in how we think about the game and also how we've consumed it and sort of the tradition around it that sort of cast those differences. At the end of the day, though, there's a lot of similarities that really do exist, but I think it's easy to see soccer as this foreign sport that wasn't really something that was around in the U.S., but was, because we do have a rich soccer history, right? I can point to U.S. participation in the early 1900s where we're literally sending multiple teams to the Olympics and actually winning medals, right, in soccer. And so we have this history, and yet at the same time, it evolves to this point where it's such a counterpoint to what the way we watch sport is, the way we consume sport is, and that then causes that fear, right? We fear the other. We fear what we do not know, and that becomes what soccer is.
Yeah, I think that you're right, where it's kind of like the idea of like large scale mob violence as like team supporters. When I lived in the UK for 2 years, I attended Arsenal matches, and I'm an Arsenal fan, and you get booed. You get booed hard if you are not an Arsenal supporter in the Emirates. And I was reading Nick Hornsby's Fever Pitch.
Yes.
And he talks about, like, in the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, it was fights. It wasn't just that you would go to a match and get booed. Like in America, like if you go to a basketball game and you're wearing a home game for the opposing team and you're wearing the wrong colors, you'll get booed. That's a thing. You'll get booed. And if you're in Philly, you might have something thrown at you. But like in the UK and in other places, like they especially in the 70s and 80s, it was fights, large scale fights. And people were worried about that. And if you were a kid attending a game or even just a young adult or somebody who was not physically fit and able to fight, like it was dangerous for you to go. So I think that really is kind of the thing that El Salvador and Honduras were playing on, that cultural difference, where I think America was aware of the violence that's happening in soccer across the world, but they didn't really have an analog for it or understand why it was happening. And so they kind of were hoping to play on that juxtaposition. So let's talk about some things that are the same. We talked about a lot of things that are different, right? About the soccer now and the soccer then, but let's talk about one of the things that's the same. Nationalism. Have countries changed how have people are still doing it? How have we changed the way we're stirring up nationalism through these soccer matches? Back then, they had the propaganda campaigns that were literally pamphlets that they would hand out to people, and they booed during the national anthems. How are we doing it now? What's the modern way to be a jerk about it?
Well, this is a good question. First off, I have to say I'm glad you support the correct Premier League club. So come on, you Gunners! Great season. Yeah, was at Emirates for the Everton match this season. So the one
Excellent.
the Max Dowman match, and actually by pure chance, his elementary school teacher was sitting behind us, and, like showing me photos of like 8-year-old Max Dowman, which doesn't look too much different than the current one because he is still so young. It's a
Yeah,
little
that
bit
was
frightening.
within the last decade. Yeah,
Yes.
that was recent.
So
Max Dowman is the teen sensation for Arsenal, who is the youngest Premier League debut, or second youngest Premier League debut, youngest Premier League scorer, youngest Champions League starter. It's list of awards goes on and on. Just for those who are not aware of Max Dowman, but yes, the nationalism.
some of it's different, but some of it's the same. So maybe it's not as directly nationalism in terms of it, the government pushing it, but we still see it a lot, for example, in media discourse. And of course, that depends where you are in the world, but there are certain, state-run media that are very emphatic about the use of sport. You can look at, the easy one to look at right now is Saudi Arabia and their attempt to use sport to, as we would say, sport wash, right? To influence how people feel about the world. But it even happens, in actual commercial media. So my wife and I actually have a paper. I'm in Japan right now, so this is a perfect example. Japan and Korea both have a territorial island. It's literally just a rock in the middle of the water. No one can even really live there. In Korean, it's called Dokdo. In Japan, it's called Takeshima. Both countries believe that it is their sovereign territory, and do not agree over it, and routinely do political stunts such as landing 50 people to go there, like they're actually going to live there, and then they're like, nope, this is just a rock, we got to get back on the boat and go back and turn around. Probably offending both our Korean and Japanese audience here, so this is a amazing job by myself. But for example, what we looked at actually is during the Olympics, there was Japan and Korea played each other. And after the match, one of the Korean players brought out a sign that says Dokdo is our own or something like this. And firestorm, right? Japanese media. Oh, this is our island. How dare you? Da, 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 da. Korean media, it's all, a nationalistic firestorm. All over a sign at the Olympics. End of the day, nothing changed other than it riled people up, right? And that's still sort of how this happens, right? Is especially through media that this happens. Now, one of the big shifts now is we have social media. So people can then get on and also participate. And that's where things get a little bit different now because they can boil over to a different level. There's the friendly jabs at each other, right? I do that with one of my former British colleagues. I'm always constantly making fun of him, especially when, the British are coming over here for the World Cup, and I'll be like, oh, can I direct you all to Yorktown and have a site where it all went wrong, so, or, oh, South Carolina, don't you guys have a little bad history here? Please don't visit this thing. I give them a hard time about that. That's, friendly banter in the words of a British. But what happens on social media now can get to a level that people go way overboard. And so there are some similarities still in how we evoke nationalism, obviously. But we also have different tools now that can make it spread even worse. I can only imagine what social media would have been like during the football war, right? Those gangs roving the streets, like both sides tweeting live videos. It would have probably cast this even further, right?
Well, so I have a question about that I'll get to in a second, but one of the things that I found really fascinating and that I couldn't quite fit into because it's a wall of text into the podcast itself was Honduras passed out like tons, and this is months before the matches, passed out pamphlets upon pamphlets. So there was the one that I said where they had slogans like "Pick up a stick and kill a Salvadoran," which is an insane thing for a government to print. But they also had these pamphlets that they gave out to Salvadorans living in Honduras that were essentially like, hey, if you were a good person, you just leave. And if you don't leave, we're not responsible for what happens to you. And so they had been sending, that propaganda campaign had been so very long that what part of the lies or like the misunderstanding we have about the football war is that like it kind of was all flashpoint around these matches. Honduras was building this awful case against like nationalist case against El Salvador to oust all of the people for, like I said, months, if not years before this happened. But you were talking about social media. I had a question for later on, but I'm going to ask it right now. Social media definitely can be the double-edged sword, right? Because it can spread the hateful pamphlets that Honduras are putting out, hashtag pick up a stick and kill a Salvadoran or something. But you also see sometimes, and this is more earlier social media than more recent, people using social media to do ground reporting where they actually report what's actually happening. And yes. I wonder if if they had that kind of reporting, if you would have such a bad response, because you'd be able to kind of debunk a lot of the top-down propaganda that was coming over the radio and the print media from both countries.
Oh, that's a very good point. There is that ability to debunk. So I think early era social media, it could have been a useful tool, right? To show, look what's actually happening, right? Trying to put this out there. Unfortunately, the social media I think we see today is more algorithm driven. That is all about what gets clicks, likes, more than what is the truth, right? We can all talk about post-truth era, stuff like this. I'll go on and on, but this isn't a PhD level seminar for us to debate about that for hours. But the reality is right, algorithm drives interest. And so unfortunately, the truth doesn't always get the most views and clicks in how the system works. What is provocative and explosive does. And in that sense, like how we have Twitter/X running today could entirely shift the dynamics, right? And make things worse. I mean, just look at it now. And the current World Cup's going to be an interesting case. You have Iran and the United States playing each other. No, not playing each other, but, playing a same tournament at the same time, while they're engaged in military conflict, while both the U.S. and the Iranian government are using social media accounts to try to make fun of each other. It is quite juvenile, if you ask me. It is something you expect of teenagers, and yet you have them sending jibes. And I was talking to another reporter the other day. I was like, you can expect the moment U.S. wins, or the moment Iran wins, or the moment U.S. loses, Iran's going to post something, right? Or the U.S. is going to post something that shows, oh, look how big, powerful we are. Or, hey, look, they're total losers. We're clearly right in this international conflict. And they're using sport to do that, right? So this is, sport again becomes that useful tool to, project that nationalistic image that we desire as a nation, right, onto both ourselves and to others.
So I think you touched on something that's really interesting by bringing this into the modern World Cup, because at the start of the last episode, I kind of made that allusion. I made that gesture where I talked about in broad terms what that World Cup was, and then it's like, oh, you thought I was talking about now. Do you think that you could have a incident, maybe not a full-blown war, but do you think that there is a chance that this World Cup will start an international incident based on the fact that America has already shown its willingness to deny people entry, villainize teams, attack cultures, the government specifically, not the people?
Yes. I don't think we're going to get an international incident from this World Cup, but I think the reason for that is because FIFA is essentially will do everything we say at this point. Right? The governing body is basically bent over and said, oh, you said our referee can't come in the country? Oh, they can't come in the country. oh, you said these Iranian delegates can't come that normally we would always have come? No, they can't, no, right? And so it's
They'll play in
constantly,
Mexico. Yeah.
yeah, they'll go, we'll send them to play in Mexico. We'll do whatever it takes to make the country happy. So I think that's where it's a little bit different as the governing body is bending over. Yet, at the same time, there are potentials for flashpoints. And I just worry that, with the U.S., with this many different people, with what's happening with ICE, all of these things, I won't say it'll start a military conflict, but I can say that it could start there are potentials for numerous types of international incidents that could further cast the image of America in a very negative light globally, which, I always want to be careful about how important sport is in the diplomatic realm. But, I don't want to say it's this most important thing. Clearly, there's a lot more important things that happen at global geopolitical scale. But having this does not help. And traditionally, right, the World Cup or even the Olympics are almost like that truce time, that ceasefire time. Everybody's going to come to the table. We're going to calm down. Look, even Putin has calmed down, right? Which is the crazy thing to say. Putin has specifically lowered down and not fought wars because of him hosting mega sporting events. And yet here we are hey, we got the World Cup, the FIFA Peace Prize. We'll bomb 10% of the countries that have that are member nations of FIFA gave us a peace prize. So, right, it's tiring, but there are some instances, but I don't think it'll grow to the level of it would be a war or anything like that.
Sure. And I think though it is likely that whatever would happen would be sports washed. Whatever, it would be immediately, it would be almost like sports generated in a way that
Yes.
immediately sports washed in a way that's really fascinating. That, the football war was not. It was obviously kind of done afterwards. The matches happened pretty clean. Now, that being, you mentioned FIFA. You mentioned the FIFA Peace Prize, which is an absolute, I'm going to go and say, disgrace. So FIFA is not the hero now. Wasn't the hero in 1970. They saw what was happening with Honduras and El Salvador. They knew this stuff was happening. Although the third match was always slated to be in a neutral football site, it was, in Mexico where they're hosting the cup, they still made sure to have it off. But they didn't actually do anything to stop this. They didn't alter the matches in any way. They didn't do what might have been a smart thing, was just have all three matches played on neutral soil. What is FIFA's responsibility to put diplomacy before football?
Oh, this is a very interesting question. So I just got back from the United Nations World Cup Summit. So I was inside of the UN for 2 days talking about, my part was more about the future of football, right? That's a lot of what I look at. But, we had actual major diplomats ambassadors from other countries come in. I've heard it more than once where it was said, sport is a form of diplomacy. And it was also then equated that war is also a form of diplomacy, and all of their outcomes is to get peace. And I was like, ooh, yes, and in very different ways. So then if you think about what is FIFA's role in this, are they really a diplomat? Or do they really have this ability? I think under Sepp Blatter, you saw this attempt to actually be a diplomat, where he would be going, oh, we're going to go to South Africa, and we don't want anything bad to happen during this time. We're going to Russia. We're going to ask Putin, right? This is peace. You must respect the sport. Sport is everything. I think in the 70s, they still had this very pure attempt, right? 60s and 70s. He is not a saint. Go read about Avery Brundage, the University of Illinois grad, who led the IOC, who's the president, right? He's famous for, the games must go on at Munich, right? After the Munich events and tragedy there, right? That the sport must happen. And so I think that really is a reflection of how these administrators of sport back then felt about it. Oh, yes, no matter what, the sporting event must happen. The game must go on. We have scheduled this for the integrity of the sport. You must play it. Forget that it could be the powder keg that literally starts a military conflict where hundreds could die. It's, hey, this game must be played. That is the ultimate importance. So I think they are to blame more for their naivety, right? It's, can you, what's the difference between negligence and stupidity? Well, which one can be tried criminally, or, which one can you go to jail for, and which one is just, oh, you're an idiot, right? And I feel they sort of sit on that borderline. Sometimes they're just entirely ignorant of what sport and soccer can do. On the other hand, there are times where they're clearly negligent. And I feel this is one of those negligence moments. Like, oh, we can see everything that's happening, but you know what? Sport is important. Everybody understands sport. The game must go on, right? And you hear this over and over. And then, unfortunately, things happen.
Yeah, I think that there's a really interesting line to be drawn between FIFA being corrupt, which it certainly has been at times and is, you could argue, is just continually, and FIFA just trying to essentially wash its hands of responsibility for things. Like it wants to be the soccer guys, but then of course they have so much power that they've graduated beyond just being the guys who organize soccer matches. And I
Yes.
think they haven't reckoned or are trying to hide from the fact that they are more than just a soccer body at this point, and they should be better about it, regulated, all kinds of things. But let's actually talk a little bit about the actual soccer, the actual football that happened during this game. Like I said, really hard to find audio of the first and second matches. Possibly does not exist, or at least isn't still around that I can find. But the third match totally does exist, and I played the clips for you in the main episode, and it was a 3-2 extra time game, pouring rain. Star player gets injured, goes out. There was a bicycle kick in it, and you can find this video. You can find. So I do tell you, go on the internet, watch. It's a great kick. What this match should be an all-timer, right? A World Cup qualifier that still lives on as one of the greats. Do you think that what the football were happening the way it did actually kind of stopped this game from being remembered as one of the great World Cup qualifying matches of all time?
I mean, I think it has to be this case, right? This is everything there, right? I mean, you throw in the weather just to start with, okay. Then you get that 3-2 score line. You have, it's 70s football. It's not like today. You have people kicking each other in the mud. I mean, it is everything that, especially, actually, I'm going to bring back the British. It's a lot of British old school fans. This is almost the football they hearken for. People kicking the hell out of each other, 3-2 score lines. Let's not complain about Arsenal set pieces or anything like that. But it is an all-time great, right? We can think of some of these great matches, like Tab Ramos's shot heard around the world to get the U.S. into the World Cup. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's his bicycle kick essentially to get the U.S. back to qualify for the World Cup. A critical moment in U.S. soccer history. I can go the opposite way. My own tragedy, literally called in the Japanese media the tragedy in Doha, where Japan was winning 2-1. They're going to go to the 94 World Cup in the U.S., first World Cup ever, and Iraq takes a short corner taken short. You already know the rest of the story. Iraq scores, Japan drops from being first place to like third place, and back then, right out of that group, only top two wins. So literally on the last kick of the game, they're out of the World Cup. So I watched that live. That was not great to watch. So, but no, there's all these great World Cup moments, and especially even in qualifying. And yes, the football war essentially has washed this out, because when we talk about, oh, what happened in Honduran football? Oh, well, didn't they get into a war with some other country? Right? That's what it is. It's not, oh, they played one of the greatest matches of all time, and then some military conflict happened.
Yeah, when I was watching the game, it first of all, I mean, the quality of the recording is not amazing, so it's a little bit hard to see, but it is really excellent, fun, like you were talking about, 70s football, where people are, legs are slamming into each other, people are doing hard tackles, and the goals are just really fun to watch. There's another one where the I think it's the El Salvador keeper goes up, and he just bounces off his chest right to the Honduran striker, who slots it home easy. And it's like, yeah, no, that's the good stuff. I love that. So I have one last question for you, and that's, we talk a lot about the countries, El Salvador, Honduras. We talk a lot about the people of those countries that are affected by this. We think about all of that all the time, and as kind of the teams as abstract from the people playing on them. We don't ever talk about the players on the field. I tried to, at the end of the podcast, give you their perspective. They didn't think about this as like a big, kind of proxy war soccer match at all. They were playing soccer and enjoying it, and have real, kinship with their, fellows across the pitch. What happens to the players when you're used like this? Like, how does that affect them when the governments and the countries behind them are so full of animosity, and the players are just kind of not? They're trying to do their job and play a game.
I mean, it definitely has a major impact. I would even say an emotional and psychological toll on the players, right? And we have seen this. This is not the only moment this has happened in history, obviously, that, governments, like, I mean, I'll use a fictional version. Everybody thinks about Rocky IV. Ivan Drago, right? He's essentially used
I must
as
break you.
I must break you, right? And then, by the end, it's like, I don't fight for the country, I fight for me, right? And he like, oh, we want to show his individualism. But the reality is even today, there are still athletes who are very heavily influenced by their nation states, if not controlled, right? If we just use the word directly. So, it can have a big toll on them, especially like, emotionally and psychologically. I think sometimes it doesn't always fully affect the performance they have, but it also affects like how they can talk to people, all of this. I mean, a good example exists right now in soccer is North Korea. We don't really see much of the North Korean men's team. They're not exactly amazing, but the North Korean women, especially at the under 20, under 17 level, are actually one of the best teams in the world for women. And the North Korean women's club team actually just won the Asian Women's Champions League. And so, we're getting video of them coming back to North Korea, and there, of course, meet, Kim Jong-un, the dear leader, right? And they're literally jumping and literally jumping up and down, clapping while they all meet him, just like it's a rally. And it's like, you can see how much certain governments control athletes. And then yet for those who are out there and playing and being used as part of propaganda, and yet all they want to do is go out and play the game, right? And look, that's not my enemy, but the media and the government say it is. Well, it's like, well, how do I react to that? Like, it's like, I usually would shake this person's hand. Should I shake their hand? Like, how do I even behave in these situations, right? So it does create a lot of turmoil within the athlete. I said it doesn't affect performance, but after time, it can affect performance as they start to think more and more about these things. What should I be doing out here? Like, I mean, when it's bad enough, you have to think a split second decision. Do I shoot? Do I pass? And now you're out there like, oh man, do I shoot? Do I pass? How should I do? What's the best thing for the country? Like, all of a sudden your head fills with too many thoughts, right? And so, those things can really impact performance of an athlete. That said, I think the bigger side, it does come to that psychology, right? It really can take a toll on somebody to, like, I'm playing a sport. Yes, they're my competitor, but, off the field, I would shake their hand. Now, all of a sudden, it's like I have to cast them as an enemy. I mean, the outcomes are usually, one, I will cast them as an enemy, and that doesn't go well, right? You can get some very violent outcomes within a match. Or two, you really are constantly at turmoil with yourself and what your identity is as an athlete, as a member of this team, as a member of this nation.
Yeah, the players that all gave their responses all said that they did not have animosity for these other players, and they like the lasting images of them shaking hands in the pouring rain. And I think it's really it has been draining on them in the time that has elapsed since. When people go and talk to these players, it's never tell me about the games, tell me about that campaign, the 1970 World Cup where you went and you got, and spoiler, Honduras or El Salvador lost all of its matches, and I don't think it scored a goal. I think it went goalless. Nobody asked them about that. It's always about the football war. And I feel that that's really sad. I could have reached out to them, talked to them, gotten quotes, but I honestly held back because they've answered those questions time and time again. I put some of their responses, the things that I would have asked them, into the podcast as quotes, but I just didn't want to, continue delivering that narrative to them. They already know.
Yes.
They know the first part of that podcast really well, and they lived the second. So I think that's something that I would take from this is just they're the people. Like, often it's the players are some of the people that get hurt the most when you start heaping that kind of pressure on them.
Yes.
Now, that was my last question. I had so much fun talking about soccer, politics, and it was the subject isn't exactly the brightest, shiniest, funnest thing, but I think it's really important. So tell people where they can find your work, and plug anything you need to plug.
First off, I'm going to say it's a pleasure to be here, right? I mean, this has been great. I think a lot of my students would say that this fits perfectly with my ethos in some sense. I do bring some doom and gloom into everything I do. If you've watched The Big Short, Mark Baum, the character played by Steve Carell, people often are like, oh, Nick's sort of like him. He walks around going, this is stupid, you're an idiot, like going around like this. But no, I mean, I love this discussion because I think it really shows the reach of sport, the importance, but I like to also highlight the overimportance sometimes that sport has, right? And a lot of sport professors, I'm not going to name names, sorry everybody in my field, there are a lot of people who are like, oh, sport can solve the ills of society. And I'm like, no, it can't. Nope. Look at the wars. Look at all this stuff. Sport hasn't fixed any of these things, right? So I love this discussion. Where to find me? I'm still on X, Twitter, mainly because I refuse to change social media platforms out of pure laziness. I'm at Watanabe, Watanabe, 2, letter K. But I mostly just post junk about soccer, or over promote my book. There's the old Simpsons thing where Homer is giving information. He's like, oh, and make sure anytime anybody's saying anything, make sure to interrupt them and say, well, in my book. So, yes, I have written a book.
One more time.
Yeah, so the book is The Beautiful Game, the stories shaping the future of soccer. It is 9 chapters, sort of mini essays that are 20 pages each about, so each can be consumed individually, but a book as a whole, that basically tell different things about sort of the future of soccer. We cover the future of the World Cup, where it's going, how FIFA has done. If there was a report card, it's not great. Probably this week they're failing.
See me after class.
Yes, it is bad, but I talk about things like, how did Beckham actually really end up in the U.S. and how did that then lead to actually Messi's arrival, and a lot of that actually goes to how Real Madrid and Barcelona conduct business, and we talk about that in the book. All kinds of things, the English pyramid system, the ACL injury issue in women's football. We discuss a whole gamut of things that's in the book. So if you're interested in soccer or just want to know a little bit more as the World Cup's going on, it's sort of like a friendly companion. I've written it for all audiences. You don't need to know who, played right back for Cheltenham Town in the 1980s, right? To appreciate what the book is. Yeah, if anybody's interested, please pick up a copy, give it a read. If you have questions, always feel free to fire them at me, answer them. I've had some people actually asking me questions as they read the book. I have actually a really long email chain going with someone in the UK right now that keeps having a discussion. It's really fun to see how some people react to some of the stuff I've written. So, yeah. Also, I'm a professor at the University of South Carolina, so anyone interested in sport and entertainment management, sport business, we have a wonderful program, so please reach out. And that's at all levels, undergraduate, master's, and PhD. So,
awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Nick Watanabe.
Oh, no, you don't have to call me doctor.
Oh, I must. And thank you guys for listening. And remember, until next time, keep playing.